In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. Folks, today, Breonna Taylor's family and attorneys held a news conference at Louisville's Jefferson Square Park in response to the grand jury's decision in her death. Taylor's mom wrote a letter to express her hurt by the decision. Her sister read what she wrote.
And most of you know this has been emotionally, mentally, and physically draining for my sister. So I'm gonna do the honor and read her thoughts after Daniel Cameron's decision. And I quote, "I never had faith in Daniel Cameron to begin with.
Amen.
I knew he was too inexperienced to deal with a job of this caliber. I knew he had already chosen to be on the wrong side of the law. The moment he wanted the grand jury to make the decision, what I had hoped is that he knew he had the power to do the right thing, that he had the power to start the healing of this city, that he had the power to help men over 400 years of oppression. What he helped me realize is that it will always be us against them, that we are never safe when it comes to them. Maddeningly, in an email, called us animals and thugs. It's clear that that is the way that they will always see us. I was reassured Wednesday of why I have no faith in the legal system, in the police, in the law that are not made to protect us black and brown people. But when I speak on it, I'm considered an angry black woman. But know this, I am an angry black woman.
There seems to be two justice systems in America. One for black America and one for white America. And this has been emphasized by this grand jury proceeding into the killing of Breonna Taylor. You know, Sam Aguiar, it's kind of ironic when you think about the message that is being sent from this grand jury ruling. It's like they charged the police for missing shooting bullets into black bodies, but not charging the police for shooting bullets into black bodies. Where that happen at?
In Kentucky, in Louisville. In Louisville. In the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
And we question what evidence did Kentucky Attorney General send to the grand jury?
That's right.
Did he tell them about the probable cause affidavit that had a lie on that affidavit, which was the basis for which the judge signed this no-knock warrant in the first place to allow them to be at Breonna's apartment and bust open her door?
That's right.
Because if he didn't send that, my son, well, what did he argue on Breonna's behalf?
What did he argue? What did he argue?
Tamika Mallory, co-founder of Until Freedom, they have been protesting there. Their team actually has moved to Louisville. She did not hold back in blasting the Attorney General of Kentucky.
You mentioned at the press conference, which I thought was quite interesting, that he's a black man. And as I laid and cried and hurt for Tamika Palmer and for Breonna Taylor and for Kenny Walker and for Janiyah, who we need to love up on. As I laid there and I thought about him saying he's a black man, I thought about the ships that went into Fort Monroe and Jamestown with our people on them over 400 years ago. And how there were also black men on those ships that were responsible for bringing our people over here. Daniel Cameron is no different than the sellout Negroes that sold our people into slavery.
She said it.
And helped white men to capture our people, to abuse them, and to traffic them while our women were raped, while our men were raped by savages. That is who you are, Daniel Cameron. You are a coward. You are a sellout, and you were used by the system to harm your own mama, your own black mama. We have no respect for you, no respect for your black skin, because all of our skin folk ain't our kinfolk, and you do not belong to black people at all.
Folks, attorney, again, Ben Crump and so many others spoke. They made it perfectly clear they want to see the transcripts released. Cameron's office has not responded to the request to release the transcripts. However, on Wednesday, he said he was not releasing the full grand jury report because of both the ongoing criminal case and an FBI investigation into the case. Still, lots of questions are being raised, especially about the ballistic report. Now, remember, he said, Daniel Cameron, that Kenneth Walker fired a shot that hit one of the officers. That's what gave them cause to return fire. I want to bring in Amisha Cross, political analyst and Democratic strategist, and Rob Richardson, host of Disruption Now podcast. Here's the thing that I find to be interesting when we break this thing down, Rob. And I'm going to go to the Twitter feed of a gentleman named Rob Ferdman. And I'm going to pull this up because this is what he laid out. And he is a correspondent with Vice News. Breaking Breonna Taylor news. The initial ballistics report that was included in the investigative file given to the Attorney General's office by LMPD to prove Taylor's boyfriend fired the bullet that hit LMPD officer Sergeant Mattingly. Then he said a portion of the report, which references the bullet believed to have hit Mattingly, concludes, quote, due to limited markings of comparative value, the item was neither identified nor eliminated as having been fired from number 45, which corresponds to the magazine found in Walker's gun. Walker's criminal defense attorney, Rob Eggert, provided a screenshot of the report to Vice News, which confirmed its validity. Eggert said he shared it because of the Attorney General's remarks on Wednesday. This is the screenshot right here. So the Attorney General stands up before the cameras and says that without a doubt, it happened. This is what Furman writes. The existence of the possibility that Walker did not fire the bullet that struck Mattingly in the leg, along with crime scene photos recently obtained by Vice News, raised questions about how the investigation was conducted. Sergeant Mattingly says Walker was about 20 feet away when he fired a shot that hit him in the leg, but photos of Mattingly's wound show potential signs of being shot from much closer, according to Patrick McLaughlin, who teaches forensic science at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. McLaughlin served as a detective in the NYPD for 20 years, most of which he spent in the evidence collection team. He said the easiest way to tell for sure is through a gunshot residue test, but no such test appears to have been conducted on Mattingly's wound or clothes. A preliminary report on Mattingly's wound, which was part of discovery in Walker's criminal case, says no visible soot or residue on Mattingly's pants and indicates he was shot from distant range.
Yeah, well, look, I think it's been pretty well exhausted what Cameron has done. He's done what most prosecutors do. They act as the defense attorneys for the officers that are being charged, and he continued that. But again, if I can take a moment, because I think I'm the only lawyer here, I want to just talk about the bigger picture here, because I think we all agree on Cameron, and I think Tamika Mallory said it, and we don't actually kind of drop the mic on that point. I think the greater point is to talk about systemically why we're here and the bigger issues, because even if we had a Marilyn Mosby there, it would be a gigantic task for her to win this case. And here's why. Because when you think about how the laws are in this country and how our system operates, there are essentially three ways, as people know. One, we make the laws, the legislators. Two, the enforcers of the law, the prosecutors, the presidents, the mayors, all those people who are enforcing the law that was made. But the fact that we forget the most, and you had RBG's funeral, which is why I want to bring this up right now, being laid to rest. The third, the people who interpret the law probably have more power than the first two. Now, why do I say that? Now, if you go back to just very quickly Reconstruction, when we got a lot of our rights, some of the greatest expansion in the history for African Americans happened in that period when the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment passed, where we had to get 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, and absolutely almost the entire country, 3/4 of the states, to approve us getting rid of slavery, giving us the right to vote, and making us citizens. 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments. Even with that on paper, clearly stated, Plessy v. Ferguson, we know that they interpreted in such a way that we can be separate but equal, and then that brought on Jim Crow and all the oppression and all the terror that brought on. Fast forward to Breonna Taylor and why this is relevant. Now, the Supreme Court for years, going back to a case out of Ohio called Terry v. Ohio, when they first started eviscerating the Fourth Amendment, which is supposed to protect us from unreasonable search and seizures like Breonna Taylor went through, that where she lost her life. But starting then, police were allowed to use reasonable suspicion. They happened to see 3 black guys walking in Cleveland, and they looked suspicious to them. They were actually right this time, but they used that to essentially justify stop and frisk, racial profiling and everything else. And then law after law gave more prosecution, more power, till they got to this point where you can do this. So the system has been in place where they could do this in a way. And this is part of what they did every day. The Breonna Taylor is the first time that the light has been shined on them in a long time. But this happens. This has been happening for the last 30 years in this country. And at least we're now starting to shine a light on this. And it's immoral, it's inhumane. It shouldn't have happened. But if we're honest, it's been legal for a long time. But we need to make sure that it's not legal anymore. We need the Fourth Amendment to actually apply to black people in this country.
But the thing, Amisha, that I think what this raises, and that's why you see Ben Crump saying release the transcripts, to understand what was presented to the grand jury. Cameron is already, he would not acknowledge if he recommended any charges. And so other legal experts have said that because the grand jury did not return a no bill against the other 2 officers, that it's possible they did not even include them in this grand jury proceedings. Sure, and this is where the public needs to know, okay, and this is the problem. Grand juries are secret. What did you do in the room? Did you actually go in a room and fight for Breonna? In fact, I received a statement earlier that from someone about this, talking about the same thing, that what they did was they also relied on one person who said they heard the cops, but that person, the first 2 times, said they heard nothing. It wasn't until a 3rd interview. So the public, what they're saying is, we need to know what you presented. Did the Kentucky Attorney General Cameron hold back information? Did they present incomplete investigative information? That's why the family is saying, we want to see the transparency of what you presented.
The family is 100% in the right here. This is a time where we need to sunshine and be able to figure out exactly what was presented to this grand jury. Because as you stated in that question sequence, what we do know is that Daniel Cameron went into this knowing that he was going to play ball in a certain court and that it wasn't going to be presented in a way that would actually have justice for Breonna Taylor. That's not what he was trying to move towards anyway. What he was trying to move towards was an eradication of what happened in general, and to create some type of semblance of the law behind it. And he wanted to do that in a way that not only eradicated the fact that Breonna Taylor's life mattered, but also wouldn't hurt the piggy bank that helped him to coast into the AG position anyway. Because what people have to recognize is that Daniel Cameron, and we do lean on this for a good reason, Daniel Cameron's campaign was funded over 60% by people who had either served on the force or those people who were current members of police unions. So there's a huge impetus for Daniel Cameron to make sure that he is not bringing forth or pushing for any charges for these police officers, because he's been in bed with them for quite some time at this point. But beyond that, I think that what was done was a presenting of facts that were not necessarily what was needed in this case. What we know is that AGs have historically presented information when they didn't necessarily want to come down on police officers that didn't actually include the full picture. And I think that what we saw in this case, in addition to not full information to projectile of those bullets was that also he never really wanted there to be questioning into the other two officers, and not too much questioning into the one who actually received the wanton abandonment charge either. But he definitely wanted to not have there be charges against those two officers, specifically because he didn't want to bring in that national media attention. When you saw the conversation, when he stood and he gave his press briefing in that conference, he spoke very, very passionately about him wanting to keep this thing in-house, wanting there not to be influence of outside people who didn't live in Louisville, acting as though the rest of us couldn't possibly understand what those police officers were under when they actually entered that home. And what we're seeing time and time again from conservatives right now, as well as him, was that he felt as though this was justified. And going into bringing in a grand jury, he wanted to present evidence that showcased what he automatically felt without there actually being a grand jury hearing beforehand. He felt that it was justified, and he wanted to present information to them that would showcase that it was justified, as he said during that press briefing, which I think was very interesting, because he himself is making that claim before anything was actually reviewed. And I think that he was doing this on purpose because he wanted to not allow there to be a full investigation. He wanted to only present a certain light because he wanted those officers to get off. He wanted to maintain that, structure of this is the badge and this is their enforcement. He wanted to draw a clear line to say that these officers were acting in some type of self-defense and oops, sorry, somebody died, but the boyfriend shouldn't have been shooting at the cops. I think that there was something there for him, and his gain from this is that it runs along the mantra of President Trump. It runs along the mantra of Mitch McConnell, law and order. You heard him say it during the press conference. This was literally him going tit for tat on down the line of the Republican rhetoric that we've heard time and time again during this Trump administration, but also trying to really throw shade at protesters. I thought it was very interesting also during that briefing that he brought that up as a means of diminishing the fact that Breonna Taylor's death has still not been fully investigated. This was a murder. And coming off of those charges, none of that is actually seen at all. There was more care and concern to the plaster on the walls of adjacent apartments than there was to the actual murder of a human being. And I think that's just demonstratively terrible. And it's a stain on the AG's office and a stain on Kentucky.
Well, the thing that we have to understand, Rob, you basically made the point, is that clearly, hold on 1 second. Clearly, folk want justice for Breonna Taylor, but what we have to look at here is this is really a situation where you have to have a real thorough examination of the entire police department, of the entire district attorney's office, because this is, here's the deal. You could take any one of these shootings, and if you do not have, the people do not have the trust in those who are leading the investigation, and then those who are proceeding to the grand jury, then this is going to be the outcome. And that's the real issue here. So Cameron might say, oh, I was a special prosecutor. Yeah, but did you stack the deck walking in to basically reach the conclusion based upon what you presented? That's what people are asking for. Rob, go ahead.
No, and I think that's fair to ask for, and I agree with everything that you and Amisha have said. But just to add to the point about the law and the changes we need to do, we need to seek changes at the state level, because you can interpret the Fourth Amendment stronger at your state level, and we need to be demanding that these things happen, because those are the type of changes that can make systemic change. And I'll just say everything that Amisha talked about, the fact that police lie, prosecutors lie, and that prosecutors have the discretion to lie, to discriminate. Those things have been litigated all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has said, cool, go ahead and do that. And so when people talk about these and going to this issue of this election and these elections and to 2016, people are like, no big deal. Now we're seeing the big deal. This is a big deal because they decide how you interpret the law. That sent Black people back for 80 years in this country. So we need to understand the power of judges. We need to understand power locally of changing these state constitutions and making sure that they enforce the Fourth Amendment. Those are the things we need to look at as we solve these problems. And yes, we definitely go after the AGs, hold them accountable, put pressure on them, but we also need to look at it from a holistic, systemic point of view.
And that's why when people talk about systems, this is what they mean by systems. All right, folks, back to our Roland Mark unfiltered video in just 1 minute. As our community comes together to support the fight against racial injustice, I want to take a second to talk about one thing we can do to ensure our voices are heard. Not tomorrow, but now. Have your voices heard in terms of what kind of future we want by taking the 2020 census today at 2020census.gov? Now, folks, let me help you out. The census is a count of everyone living in the country. It happens once every 10 years. It is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. The thing that's important is that the census informs funding, billions of dollars, how they are spent in our communities every single year. I grew up in Clinton Park in Houston, Texas, and we wanted new parks and roads and a senior citizen center. Well, the census helps inform all of that and where funding goes. It also determines how many seats your state will get in the U.S. House of Representatives. Young black men and young children of color are historically undercounted, which means a potential loss of funding for services that helps our community. Folks, we have the power to change that. We have the power to help determine where hundreds of billions in federal funding go each year for the next 10 years. Funding that can impact our community, our neighborhoods, and our families and friends. Folks, responses are 100% confidential and can't be shared with your landlord, law enforcement, or any government agency. So please, take the 2020 census today. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov.